President Trump doubling down on the original travel ban this morning in a series of tweets stating the Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to the Supreme Court. But what exactly is the difference between the two versions of the ban, and will President Trump's Twitter barrage actually create legal hurdles? Joining me now, Jay Sekulow. Jay, thanks for joining us. First of all,
hey, Charles.
let's explain to the audience the differences, the distinctions between that first travel order from President Trump and then the second one.
So in the first one, the issue that became prevalent was, of course, those that actually held valid visas. They were going to be caught up in this. So there was a concern that valid visa holders would not be gained access to the United States pursuant to the visas they already had. There was also a question on the effective date of when the order was going to take effect and how it was going to be implemented. So you had both the procedural aspect and the implementation aspect, and then substantively the only real significant difference on that was we had a situation where Iraq was able to give us information to not include them within the countries ultimately that had the travel restrictions put in place. I don't think there's a big substantive difference between the two, not significant, although I would say that it did close up some of the questions that existed that would have been subject to interpretation. So I think that the second order, so to speak, is tighter than the first. I think both would have been held constitutional, but the second one is the one that's going to be reviewed, is being reviewed right now by the Supreme Court.
Well, we do know that these lower courts have pointed to candidate Trump's comments as their rationale for prohibiting the travel moratorium. So could these tweets, where he now calls it a travel ban, and of course, you know, he's taken a pretty hard line talking about extreme vetting and these kind of things, could they actually make it tougher for the Solicitor General in the case before the Supreme Court?
Legally, it should make no difference because under the Mandel decision, the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States dealing with these kind of, when you look at an executive order, you look at the face of the executive order as long as there was a bona fide purpose for which that executive order was issued. Here it was national security. So they really should not be looking to what I would call extrajudicial, or in this particular case, extra presidential statements that were made during the campaign, or even, frankly, the president issuing a Twitter statement today. And whether you call it a travel ban, a travel restriction, extreme vetting, the fact is the document itself is what should be controlling, and I believe that the president had the constitutional authority, the plenary authority, both statutorily and constitutionally, to do exactly what he did. So I think the first tribunal where you're going to really see a fair shot at this is going to be the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, if they're sticking to their precedent, should rule in favor of the travel restriction on the executive order.
Should all the justices on the Supreme Court be involved in a hearing?
Well, there's the question about whether Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, should recuse herself because of her statements prior to the election. Now, here's the fact, and this is just fact, Charles. You could file a motion to recuse a justice if you want to, but you know who makes the decision? That individual justice. So I don't think she's going to recuse herself. She's not obligated to under the law. It raises a question, but not one that requires her recusal. I would think, you know, maybe for prudence sake she would, but I don't expect so here.
All right, Jay, I want you to stay right there. I want to bring in some more panel to get some other ideas and options on this.
Sure.
Josh Blackman joins us as well as Ford O'Connell. And Josh, I think you're concerned about the tweets, if I read this right on your Twitter timeline, about the tweets maybe hampering President Trump's case with the Supreme Court?
Charles, thanks for having me back. The fact of the matter is the courts are knocking down Trump left and right. He needs to do whatever he can to help the courts out, and these tweets are not helping his policy out. These tweets are calling the courts slow and political. These tweets are saying that he wants to do even tougher vetting. These tweets are saying that he wants to do even more. These tweets give his lawyers an even bigger headache. And if he wants any shot at winning the fifth vote at the Supreme Court, of course this is Justice Kennedy, he needs to tone down his Twitter. But I think his lawyers have given up on that task.
Ford, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that matters? Is it all semantics at this point?
Well, I don't think it should matter. Let me start with the first thing that the Ninth and the Fourth Circuit are talking about is Trump's tweets as a candidate. Guess what? Those should be completely out because he's trying to win an election, not execute the laws of the United States as president. So that shouldn't even be considered to begin with. In terms of this, look, I have to take a middle ground between Jay and Josh. I do agree with Jay that, frankly, they should not come in whatsoever. But in Josh's case, guess what? Control what you can control and try not to give yourself any more headaches than you already have.
Let me ask you guys. Go ahead, Jay.
Yep. No, I don't really disagree with that. I mean, it should not matter does not mean it doesn't matter. It should not matter because if you look at the law, it's exactly as it was just stated. I mean, it should not matter. But does it have an atmospheric impact to it? And look, Supreme Court cases, like any case, you're always worried about atmospherics.
What about the wave of terrorism that we've seen? Of course, London more recently, but Europe in general, even around the world. Jay, I'll start with you. Should that have some sort of bearing on this? Because it feels like certainly it speaks to Western civilization being under assault.
Well, look, I mean, you have to have a bona fide purpose for the executive order. That's what the courts looked at. And if you look at these attacks, and most recently the horrific attacks again this weekend in London, of course, it makes it real. This is not some kind of, hypothetical we're dealing with. This is real terror happening around the world. We've had it here in the United States. Fortunately, the last few months we haven't, but in Great Britain they are having it, 3 in 10 weeks, 3 incidents. So I think at bottom here, that is part of the justification for it. Now, some will argue, well, those individuals were already British citizens, but it doesn't answer this question. And I think this is a valid question that immigration and naturalization should be able to ask anybody, including a citizen. What were you doing in Syria? Who were you meeting with? If you're in a hot zone, a trouble zone, I don't think that violates your privacy.
Jay,
right.
let me add on to what exactly you just said. To your point, in 2005, radical Islamic terror was killing 5,000 people around the world in terms of the totality of it. In 2016, that's 30,000. The threat is actually getting greater. So the impetus for the need of this travel ban, whether or not you question the policy wisdom, is there and only getting stronger.
Right.
Josh, here's the interesting thing, though. In the last 2 months, refugees in America under President Trump have actually started to increase. And what I found interesting in this data, of the top 5 nations, you've got Somalia and Syria, both of them on the travel ban. Can someone say, well, listen, we've been letting these refugees in fact, at a greater pace since earlier in the year. Does that matter at all?
Well, I think the issue is if something actually, in fact, happens, right? One of these refugees, in fact, does commit some act of terror. That's basically Donald Trump setting up to say, hey, I told you so, and the courts hobbled me. Part of me thinks that what Trump is doing here is he probably knows he may lose here, and he's more or less setting the stage that if something bad, if some terrorist attack happens, he can then pin it on the courts. If so, that's a very ambitious strategy, one that's perhaps self-defeating, but I think this may be what he's going for in the long term.
In other words, you don't think President Trump has a good case here? You don't think he's going to win this?
Oh, I think he should win. Oh, my God. Under the law, he has the law on his side.
Clearly.
But this is like asking me, what are yesterday's lottery numbers or what are today's lottery numbers?
But
right?
Josh,
I know what the law was yesterday. I don't know what they will be tomorrow if the court changes its mind.
Let me put it this way. If President Obama, who compiled this list, executed this order, would it be constitutional? Absolutely, and that's the entire point here.
Well, the lawyers that were challenging said that. They said if this was issued by Hillary Clinton, if she was president, it would be constitutional. The only reason it wasn't in the majority's view is because the author of the executive order was Donald Trump, the president of the United States. Guess what? That's not the way the law is supposed to be.
Exactly.
That's not the way the law is supposed to be implemented. This is, we've got the showdown at the Supreme Court. In a sense, this is of the court's own making here. The courts have created this constitutional showdown.